everyone. So, welcome to Learn Angular the Right Way. So, my name is Salim Alam. I'm a .NET, Angular, and microservice developers. I'm a technical lead at Convene and have over 9 years of experience building software applications. And I belong from Assam, India. So, to give you a basic overview of the course agenda, we'll start with the basic introduction of what Angular is. We'll look into why we use Angular and get familiar with the terminology and all the building blocks of Angular. Then we'll look into TypeScript, try to understand what are the building blocks of TypeScript, and then we'll go ahead and convert a simple TypeScript class into Angular components and then move ahead with it. Then we'll start building nested components. We'll create our own pipe and Angular modules. And then we'll look into Angular services and how Angular communicates with our backend. It is using HTTP communications. Then we'll look into how routing and forms works in Angular application. Next, we'll spend time trying to secure our Angular application using token authentication. And finally, we'll look into how we deploy our Angular applications. And I'll share with you all the best practices when we build a production and enterprise level Angular application. Okay, to start with, what is an Angular application? So Angular is an open source web application framework. So by open source, I mean that Angular is licensed as MIT license. So which means we are free to use and modify, publish without any limitations and no rights restrictions. Even we can change the source code of Angular. So it's entirely open source. So Angular is a design framework. By design framework, we mean that we build rich user experience, front-end view design applications, that is by using HTML and CSS, and it's also a development platform. So which means that we can add logic to our front-end code while we're building Angular application. Now, Angular application is primarily used to create efficient single-page applications. So single page applications are the applications which gives a very rich user experience to our end user. With single page applications, we no longer have the page refresh when we change the content of our UI. So in single page applications, the DOM is being manipulated. Rather than changing the entire HTML page, we refresh a portion or the entire screen's DOM elements. Now, Angular facilitates development of cross-platform applications. So which means that our application will run on any platform, whether it's Windows, Linux, or Mac. And primarily we use Angular to build client-side applications. So by client-side, what I mean is that our applications will finally run on our end user's machine, that is on our end user's laptop or PC or Mac system. That is, our entire applications package is finally deployed to our end user machine. So which really gives a very fast user experience to our end user. Now coming to why we choose Angular. So as a developer, Angular really makes it much easier to work with HTML. And Angular does it by using powerful data binding features. That means whenever we want to display our properties to our HTML pages and whenever we want to work with HTML events, as a developer, our life becomes much easier when we use Angular. Now, Angular has a very modular design. By modular, I mean whatever we develop, our piece of codes can be highly decoupled. We can choose to uh, add more features to our Angular at any time. And when we decoupled our application in a modular fashion, building application becomes very faster because we have certain features we centralize our code. That means whenever we face any bugs, fixing those bugs, we don't have to fix in lots of places. We have one module where we can go ahead and change. Angular supports communication with backend server. It's built in. So there is something called as HTTP client that Angular provides, and working with our API backends becomes very easy in Angular. Angular is a very mature framework. By mature, I mean to say, like, currently we have 12 versions of Angular, and there is a huge community. So there's a constant work is being going on with Angular. If you see and visit Angular's GitHub repo, you can see that it's used over by 1.9 million users, and we have almost over 1,000 contributors. So lots of issues are constantly fixed. Lots of pull requests are constantly being merged into Angular. They have a good roadmap ahead on how they are going to release their next versions. So there are lots of features being added into Angular, and it has evolved uh, very decently over the years. Like as I showed you, Angular is a great community. If you go ahead and ask anything on Stack Overflow, if you're stuck with some feature bugs, you can just raise a issue in their GitHub repositories. There are lots of help available out there. Now, the most important thing that which make me like love Angular, that is the support for TypeScript. Now, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, but what TypeScript really brings is the strongly typed nature, the strongly typed support into the front end framework. So some developers like me who come from C# background, or anyone who comes from Java, those who comes from strongly typed language background, now developing front end applications becomes very easier. Like the support for typesafe, the support for functions and properties, clear object oriented approach in front end application makes lives much easier when we develop application using Angular. And saying that Angular has a huge availability of both free and commercially packaged libraries, that is third party libraries. We don't need to develop every uh, controls features from our own. We can go ahead and look it up on npm, that is the node package manager. Lots of packages available. There are also commercial packages. For example, Kendo UI from Telrik has a great library of Angular components. Also, Dev Express, they give us a lot of components which we can integrate with our Angular application and make our life much easier developing a very rich user experience application. Okay, so does anybody have any questions so far?
Yes, we've talked about, you've mentioned how there's lots of different components
Yep.
available. When you say component, do you mean like what I would think of maybe as like a widget, or like things like, drop down menus? Is that what you mean by component, or is there something larger than that, something more all encompassing?
Much more larger
Like what's
than
a
that.
component?
So no, component is different. Here I'm talking about packages and libraries. So component,
Okay,
yeah. So by packages and libraries, what I mean is that if we go ahead, say we need a grid system to display our data. So
right.
we need pagination, we need sorting, we need filtering. So instead of going ahead and building it from scratch, say we pick a basic bootstrap template, a basic table, and customizing it for our own. Like there are many packages and libraries which will give us out of the box. There are free packages, say for something very simple as model pop-ups. We can just go ahead to NuGet package manager and search for model pop-up in Angular. Um, Like we'll get hundreds of libraries here, packages that we can integrate in our code. Google and show you.
Actually, that's good. I get the idea. I
Mm.
I get it now. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, I got a question here.
Yeah, please go ahead.
How how feasible it is to use the third-party API at the enterprise level, or how secure
Uh,
it is?
yeah. For the secure part, we have to keep an eye on the updated vulnerability list. Uh, to be very secure, if you're on cloud, there are features which keep an eye of which keep an track of all the vulnerabilities. I believe we call it white box for Azure. So yeah, that part, whenever as a team we want to go ahead and add some third party packages, yeah, we have to sit and like, or someone decision maker has to look into it, go through the repositories of the known vulnerabilities, and they then make the decision. But if you are in totally enterprise application where security really matters, then I'll suggest you go ahead with the commercially available packages. So they will maintain their vulnerability patches and everything for you.
Yeah,
Okay,
just wanted to
makes
add a
sense.
comment
Thank
there,
you.
Deepak and Samir. So in general, in USDA, what happens was when I was researching on these third-party libraries, Angular provides something called material design. Material design
Mhm.
has all these libraries that you can use.
Yeah.
But when I was trying to use them locally in our company, USDA, not all libraries are approved. So they kind of have their own proprietary libraries that FPAC uses. And then, so it all depends on whether it is approved in USDA or not. For example, the paginated grid that we use, so FPAC provides already all the libraries that we can use. So that's a comment I wanted to make.
Yeah, that's true. And uh, while building very secure application, it's always good to not use open source because all of those compliance issues and then the vulnerabilities and patches. Because at the end of the day, it's open source, right? And no one is liable for if anything happens. So I'll suggest if security is the matter, then should go with the paid packages and libraries. Okay. So any more questions? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, no more questions here. I think we're good to move on.
Okay,
Good.
so yeah. So next I wanted to show you basically like setting up our development environment. And uh, since we have mismatch with the node version and the npm package version, I'll just show you how to go ahead with the latest one. And so I'll just give a basic overview of how to set up our environment. So like installing Node.js, we go to Node.js and we download. So for I'm using Windows, so I went ahead and downloaded my 64-bit MSI and went ahead with the simple installation process. And once the node is installed, I can check. And here you can see I have the latest node installed on my machine, that is version 14.17.5. And as soon as I install node, so the npm package is also installed. And I have 17.20.3. And for Angular CLI, after we have installed npm, all I need to do is type npm install -g, that is -g. -g is for global. That means Angular CLI will be installed globally. Now we can do it in a folder basis also if you want, but it doesn't work if we have a lower version of Angular globally and a higher version in our packages, in our folders. So that doesn't work. So yes, so when we type this command, Angular CLI gets installed, and we can verify using ng. Now ng is for Angular CLI, and if I type ng dash version, then I can see that I have the latest version of Angular, that is 12.2.1. Okay.
What is the difference between those three, Node, NPM, and NG? What is?
Okay. So NPM is the package manager that works with Node. So all the packages, libraries, third-party libraries, we deploy to the NPM that are built using Node. And Node is the basic JavaScript engine which helps us run JavaScript in our machines. Instead of running in our browser, Node gives us the technology to run our application on our machines and then convert our JavaScript code into native code. Say if we are running it on Windows, it will convert into the native code of Windows. For Mac, the same. And Angular CLI is a CLI tool, so which helps us building Angular applications. Like it helps us with scaffolding, it helps us to build our Angular application, it helps us to package our Angular applications. So does that make sense?
Just FYI, the Angular CLI that I think gets installed with the setup that we have is 10.2.0, so it's back to full major versions. Not sure
Yeah.
how impactful that'll be, but just giving you a heads up.
Yeah, so the way the course is designed, we shouldn't have any problem from Angular 8 per se. So like we didn't target it a specific version for this course. So because there was some major changes after Angular 8 regarding services and all. So how the course is designed is that from Angular 8 to Angular 12, we should be fine, but we may have problem if we don't have the proper node package installed. So if we have a version mismatch with our node packages, we may face issue. But in terms of Angular version, we shouldn't have any issue.
Yeah, Samir, can you please repeat what a node does as part of this? Node.
Yeah, so Node is a framework. So it's an engine which allows us to run JavaScript on our native machine. So usually JavaScript runs on browser, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Node is a technology which enables us to run our app. Think of it as
JVM.
as JVM. So Node is a JVM for JavaScript. So now, since we are developing our Angular application on a Windows machine, and then we will be working with that code, we'll be packaging it, we'll be building it. So we need Node to to develop our application. But what happens lastly when we build our application and deploy, all our JavaScript code is bundled up and it executes on the V8 engine of the browser in when it comes to Chrome.
So Salim, this is not a client side. Why we need to compile it on compile means basically.
Yeah. So say I'll give you an example. We are developing an application, right? And our application will work with lots of packages. Our application, we will build it using TypeScript, which the browser doesn't understand. The browser understands JavaScript. So after all of that, Node.js packages our entire application, our code into JavaScript code that the browser understands. Because if we are not using Node, we are not using TypeScript, and we are just using JavaScript and HTML, we are essentially back to what we used to do before. Like we'll be using jQuery, we will be calling Ajax calls and all. So we need Node.js, the framework, to work with Angular. And Node.js is what will compile our code and make it uh, executable on the browser.
Okay, interesting. So you are saying that Node.js compiles on the server side, generates the executable code for the browser and sends it on the client side.
Not server side, on developers machines. So here we don't have anything to do with the server side.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
But it on the browser it goes the compiled code, which is JavaScript basically. Am I right?
Which is JavaScript and HTML and CSS.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay,
I'm not sure
so
if you not sure if you noticed in the chat window, but the last step in the PDF is to run ng new session 1, and that actually errors out for me, which means there's probably a good chance it's going to error out for everyone.
Okay.
Can we bring up that PDF file, Salim? Go to the last step and let's check it.
Maybe someone else could try it, make sure it's not something specific to my environment that I just messed up. That would
Jared,
not be impossible.
It's the same one that Kiran showed, right, previously. It's about FSA events, right?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Oh, yep.
Okay, maybe show it to Salim and see if
Upgrade to, says I need to upgrade to FS events too.
Yeah, can you share your screen once?
Mine?
Yeah, I'll just want to check on the error.
Certainly. There you are.
I'm unable to see yet.
Yeah, we're also not seeing Jared.
No?
I'm not seeing.
So can anybody else quickly try to create?
Kiran, can you reshare your?
Hey, Jared, one thing I tried was I changed the registry to not be a Nexus, but to be the actual node registry, because for this training, I'm not sure how much that matters. That seems to have gotten me over some things, but it might end up being bad in the future also. So just throwing that out there.
I'm almost more tempted to see if we can somehow get the latest versions of things installed.
Do we have any firewall or something that's like prohibiting it to go out and get the packages?
Maybe if we turned off our VPN. Let me try that with a VPN off.
I think for installing the latest node, we should have admin access. I was not able to download the latest one. And it seems the node what we have is part of the package that we installed, the Angular project that we installed from FSA site.
Yeah.
That package has the node, but it has the older version. And somewhere I read about using Angular CLI, and it seems that FSA does not recommend using that. Instead, it seems that they want us to use the current app that we installed.
Yeah, Sarah, I used my personal laptop. Everything worked fine for me. So maybe something our VPN or our system preventing downloading that. If you use your personal laptop, everything I downloaded latest versions, so looks like everything working fine.
Jacob, we can only use if something is available in Nexus, right? We can't go ahead and download something and use it.
Well, that's if you don't want to, you can't deploy it to production, but I can't think of any reason why you couldn't just install it locally for learning.
Oh, okay.
if using our own personal laptops is the right option, maybe we take this offline and I don't know, maybe make it through this session today and then find out who can use their own personal laptops.
Or maybe we might just call out real quick who does not have access to a personal PC or laptop. I don't have another laptop, but I've got a PC that I could use. Does anybody not have a secondary PC or laptop that they could use for this?
Do you want them to send a quick message on the chat or to you?
For what it's worth, I turned off my VPN, and the NG new session 1 is, if nothing else, is taking a lot longer, which would lead me to believe that it's actually working better. I'm not sure. It's not done yet, but before it was done within just a few seconds, and it's been going for over a minute now, installing packages.
Yeah, that means if it ended quickly, it means that the packages were not allowed to be installed.
Right, but with the VPN off, it looks like it might be working. I'll keep you guys posted.
Okay. So should we continue while you're trying to set the environment up and others are giving that a try by turning on the VPN?
Yes, Samir.
All right. Go ahead, Salim.
Yeah.
Go ahead with the next topic of discussion.
Yes. So I believe we all are good with installing the Angular CLI. And yeah, to create a new project, Angular project, using the startup template, we can do ng new and like session 1. Now session 1 is the name of our project or a solution which will be. And when we try to create a new Angular project, it will ask first, do we want to add Angular routing? So I'll explain this in the course of the lecture, but we need to, or we want to type yes, that we need Angular routing enabled. And secondly, this comes to your team, whether if everyone is comfortable using SAS as a style sheet syntax or less, or SCSS. I have only worked with CSS, and working with CSS is quite easy in Angular. So you can choose any one of them. I will not go ahead and do this because I've already created this. Okay. So let me just cd into my demo project and I'll open my IDE, which I'm using, that is Visual Studio Code. Now, I'd suggest, if possible, you guys develop Angular application using Visual Studio Code, because Visual Studio Code is again open source and have lots of extensions that makes life easier, but it's not necessary. Angular works well with almost all the IDEs. Okay. So moving ahead, I'll just give you an introduction on the anatomy of Angular application. So all Angular application has something known as module. So we'll have at least one module in our Angular application, and you can think of modules as containers. Containers which will hold components, services, directives of our Angular application. All of these are building blocks of an Angular application. And we can have many modules which are nested to our root module. So every application which needs one module to run, we called it as the root module. So understanding modules, component, and directive. So what I want from this couple of slides is to get the terminology in, just know what the building blocks are. We'll in future sessions, we'll go and dive deep into all of them. And so modules. Now modules organizes the piece of our application into blocks. So using modules, what we can do is that we can decouple our applications uh, codes into small chunks of blocks, and then we can use those module into our root module. So each module will contain components, directives, pipes. Again, these are building blocks. These are the chunks that builds up our entire application. So one caveat is that each component, directive, and pipes can belong to only one module. Now using module, we can extend our applications and capabilities from external libraries. What it essentially means is that whenever we say we are using dev express libraries, whenever we are using Telrik or any open source libraries, we have to register them in at least one of the modules that we will build. And we can import functionalities from and export to for use by other modules. So say we created a module and then we want to export it to be used by other modules. So showing you in the code, I'll just give you how a module looks like. So this is our app module.
Yeah. 1 second, Salim. Do you want to zoom in a little bit? How about others? Are you able to see the code, or do you want Salim to zoom in?
Zoom in, please.
Is it better now?
That's good.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Salim.
Okay. Okay. Before that, let me just, so when we used Angular CLI, our startup project looks like this. So we have some configuration files. We have this package.json, Angular.json, which I'll come towards the end of this session. So we have a folder here majorly, which is the source folder. So most of our code will reside under this source folder. And when we use the ng command to create our application, the startup template, it included an app module and it built a default component for us. So now coming to the app module. So app module, this is a basic TypeScript class. And here where we declare the components. So basically we have a app component, which we have registered in our Angular module. And like I said, we can import other modules. So here we are importing this browser module and the app routing module into our root module. So now app component is acting as a root module. So whenever Angular starts, it will go ahead and look for app module TypeScript class. Now every Angular module is decorated with a ng module decorator. So here you can see we have this. It's essentially a function, which in TypeScript we called it as a decorator. And to make you help you understand, these are like attributes, class attributes or function attributes. In TypeScript, these are just a function which act as attributes. And now coming to the components. Now components are what we can define as the building block of our view. So by view, I mean what the user will view in its browser. That is, it will hold HTML, CSS style sheet. So every component has something known as the template. So this is our Angular class. So Angular components also have class and template. So the template is nothing, it's a simple HTML file. We also have a file that holds our CSS. What it does is that now in Angular, working with, while we develop front end piece of code, now we no longer have a convoluted page where we have all our HTML, all our CSS, jQuery, Ajax call. So Angular makes it highly decoupled. We need to do something in our HTML. We can go and just work with HTML. Then we can call our classes and we can organize our CSS files into our app.component.css. And then we have our main TypeScript class, which acts as the code behind. And here again, we have this decorator known as the component decorator, which has some metadata by which Angular knows. We have something called selector. So this is how we register, how we display our components. We'll learn more about components in our further sessions. But now what I want you to take away is that we using Angular component have decoupled our HTML template and our style sheets, and our logic will stay in our TypeScript code.
So each component has its own specific, potentially has its own specific CSS for that component.
Yes, correct.
The CSS isn't really at the page level, it's at the component level.
Okay, so in Angular, we have only one page, and that is your index.html page. So
Right.
this page is what actually gets served to our end user. And here you can see we have something which look like HTML tag. Here it says app root. If we go ahead and visit our Angular component,
the
you will
selector.
see this.
Yeah, there we go.
So you can think of component as custom HTML attributes, like an HTML tag which we are building, and its responsibility is to display the HTML that we are saying it holds. Okay.
Hey, quick question, Salim. Are we limited to one CSS and HTML, or we can have multiple CSS in the component?
So component level, it's better we have one CSS, but we can always import CSS at the top using the import keyword in CSS. But in Angular, there is one more concept of global CSS. There is this style.css file where we will have the CSS which multiple component uses. So the style sheet is also well organized in Angular. Now we can have multiple CSS here globally, and we can register with our application.
Got it.
Yeah.
So Salim, one quick thing. If you go back to your directory structure there, can you link the files that got generated? Can you just talk about what's there in app.module, how and what are the sections, how it is linked to other things in other files? Just so that we have a bit good understanding. Yeah, so we start from here. The top 1 to 5 is just the import statements. Can you explain what's going on over there?
Yes, Samir. So actually, my plan was to, as we go along and build our application, and then deep dive more into the modules. So I'll just explain that ng module, it expects 3 arrays. One is declaration, one is import, another one is provider and bootstrap. So what declaration array expects is that all the components, pipes, anything that we build, we will register it in our declaration array. Then import array, what it does is that any libraries that we want to use in our application, and specifically in this scenario, we want to register at the root level, we will go ahead and register in our imports. And providers is the array where we register our services. And bootstrap is how our application knows which component will be the entry point. And since I'm explaining it, I'll just explain the bootstrap as well. So we have something called the main.ts file. So when our application starts, then Angular looks into the main.ts, and here we declare that app.module will be our entry module. This is how we bootstrap and say that app.module is our root module. If we create a different module ourselves and register it here, then app.module will no longer be the root module, and the one we defined will become the root module. And similarly, in app.module, when we say that app.component will be our bootstrap component, then the app.component, that is this, will become the entry point component. And we have something called the polyfills. So Angular handles for us all the cross browser compatibility issues for us using polyfill and specifically using zone.js JavaScript library. So that's what the role of polyfills is. Yep. And I'll come to Angular JSON and package JSON a little later in today's lecture. Yeah.
Sounds good. Go ahead, please.
Okay. So where I was, yeah. So working with HTML, as I was saying, in Angular becomes very easy, and it happens with the features that Angular provides, that is bindings and directives. So let me just give you a basic demo how one-way binding works. So this is what our startup template created for us. So I'll just quickly. Okay, let me just quickly run it. Yeah, and I'll open up my code snippets here.
Okay, so what happened when you clicked on npm start? What is it doing?
Yeah, so npm start basically starts my application on my local machine, Samir. Yeah.
And it starts a web server, and whatever page you have done, just created, it allows you to access it.
Yes, it creates the node server, our local host, and then we can browse our application locally there. So
Okay, let's take a look.
yeah, so it says that Angular Live Development Server is listening on localhost 4200, and open your browser on localhost 4200. So with most of the modern web development framework, we have this a lightweight server built in, so which helps our development work faster. So here you can see that our app component is a root component. I have just changed the HTML and I have just put one h1 tag, and this is what's getting displayed in our browser. It says, hi, this works. Okay, now let me show you how easy it is to integrate a one-way binding.
What is a one-way binding?
Yeah, so one-way binding means that we have a property in our class and we want to just display it to our HTML page. We don't want to do anything, it's just for display. We don't want any input or feedback from our property, or we can say a variable that we just want to display.
Okay. So if there is one-way binding, perhaps there's also two-way binding?
Yes, Samir, I'll come to the two-way binding.
Okay, I don't think there is a three-way binding, right?
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we'll learn one-way binding and two-way binding. Go ahead.
Okay, so for one-way binding, we use something known as interpolation. It's similar to the concept of string interpolation. I believe we have that in Java and .NET as well.
Okay,
so
interpolation is what, assignment, yeah? Is that what it
Yep.
means? What is interpolation?
Interpolation is basically means our language is trying to interpret what and show it in another form.
Okay, so it's a variable and we are displaying the value of the
Yeah.
variable. That's what we are doing.
We're displaying the value of our variable, true.
Okay, sounds
So
good. Sounds
okay. Okay, so in a TypeScript class, I'll declare a basic property here. I'll just copy it from my code snippet.
And again, app component TS is basically just a generic component that we've created for this demo.
Yeah, for For today's demo, what we are doing is that the app component.ts was generated by the Angular CLI as a part of the startup template.
Okay.
In future, what we'll do, we'll take a bare bone TypeScript class and then convert that into a component, an Angular component that Angular understand, and we'll expand upon that. For now, to just give a basic feel of how TypeScript works, how one-way, two-way binding works, we are using the auto-generated component that Angular provides.
Okay.
I,
Thank you.
I should say Angular CLI provides.
And you can run this and open this up in WebStorm. I'm following along in WebStorm as he's doing this.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So I have declared a basic variable here. The variable name is display message. And I have declared the variable type to be string. So if you have never coded on TypeScript before, I'll say it will hardly take you 2 to 3 days to get used to the syntax, because since I was from C# background and I believe most of you are from Java background, it's a bit different. It's not exactly as Java, but the idea is there. The paradigm of object-oriented language is there. So once we write a couple of code in TypeScript, once we get that hands-on experience, it becomes very intuitive to work with TypeScript. So I have just declared a basic variable display message, declared its data type, its string, and I have put the value here. I said, hi, this is one-way binding. And to display it on our HTML, all I need to do is to declare, to call that variable. And we do that by using two curly braces. So by using these two curly braces, Azure knows that it's a variable and it needs to interpolate into an HTML element.
Right. So Salim, one quick thing. You're using a variable here, but can the variable be defined in any file you want, or it has to be in a specific file? Where do you define or assign value to this variable?
For one-way and two-way binding, for basic binding, even any variable that we declare in our HTML file, means we call in our HTML file, has to be declared in that associated components TypeScript file. So here we are using that variable in app.component.html, so we have to declare it in app.component.ts. Now there are other ways where we use services and all to get data from elsewhere, but still we have to assign that data to a local variable.
Okay, so if I had a variable in a different component, could I access it in my HTML file in app.component.html, or that's not possible?
No, you cannot do that straight away, but if you need the data, we can use a service
There are
as
other
a
ways.
other
Sounds
ways, yeah.
good. Sounds okay. Go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
Salim, when you declare a variable, how it is declared? Like simply the name and no any where or any other keyword in front of that?
Yeah, we can use where. So here I'm declaring basically a property. So here we don't need to use where or let. We can use constant here. And the other part is that we can declare the accesses here. So we can say it's a public. So in JavaScript, we have something, in Java, I believe we have something known as the fields. So you can think of it as the fields with the accessors.
Okay, and what the colon specifies, like display message colon, same thing you put it on the line number 4, also selector colon. So
no, this is different. So this is a JSON object.
okay.
So component is a function which expects object, and here we are defining it in a JSON way. It's a key value pair. But here it's TypeScript syntax. So if I say in C#, I'll write it somewhere like this.
Okay.
Okay. So this becomes a C# syntax where the string has to be in front of the variable name. In TypeScript, it has to be afterward followed by a colon. So it's TypeScript syntax.
Okay, so the object type is required, must, right? It's not like JavaScript. Okay, got it.
No, the object type is not required. Remember one thing, TypeScript itself compiles into JavaScript. Okay, but as an object-oriented developer, as a developer who comes from a strongly typed background, we will put the data type here. So anytime we build an application, we will, so that we don't fall into the same headaches of JavaScript with typeless keywords and all, trying to understand, okay, because here what will happen is that since we have declared the type here, I cannot go ahead and put 2 anymore. So I'll get an error out of the my IID, no runtime unexpected behaviors anymore.
Okay.
Make sense?
So it's a best practice to put a data type.
Yeah.
Or object. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And
so
trust
line number 10 is what? Title equal to demo.
Yeah, this was a type that was created by the Angular CLI, which I deleted here from here entirely. So it's essentially the same thing.
Okay.
Okay. So here, no type, no accesses, a bad practice. Recipe for bugs and errors.
Thank you.
Okay, so if I go to my browser, here you can see this is a one-way binding. It's displaying in my HTML file. So if I look at the HTML, here you can see the variable data is now rendered by our DOM.
But you didn't compile this time. Huh? You just changed.
Angular has something known as hot reload. That means that anytime I make any changes here and save my file, it's automatically compiled. It makes development life much easier.
Okay, very good, very good.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Thanks. Yeah.
What's the
So
word again?
hot reloading.
Hot reloading. Okay.
Yeah.
When does hot reloading not work? Are there instances when you have to recompile?
Yeah, when we go ahead and add some third-party libraries, we work with app modules. Mostly when we work with app modules, we need to stop our server. We can stop our server by Control-C in Windows, and I can say yes, and my server will stop. Now I make any changes in my Angular module file, and I go ahead and do ng, np. This will spun up my server again, and internally it will go ahead and build my application.
Sounds good.
Okay, so that did everybody understood what like the basic idea of one-way binding?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a question here, Salim. Like, not sure if you already covered and I missed it here. Could you show me from like when you hit the browser, what is the starting point in this Angular app that gets kicked, and from there, how other components get loaded? I'm not sure if you are.
Sure. So first, Angular looks into the main.ts file. Okay. So main.ts file has a function that says bootstrap module. Okay, so bootstrap modules go ahead and loads the basic module which we declare that okay, this is the module that you will start working with. In our case, it's app.module. And here inside app.module, we have an array known as the bootstrap, which we declare that app.component is the component that you will first go ahead and load it. Now, when we build and deploy in our client application, and when our client first open the application, he sees this index.html file. So this is what is presented to him, and this is what actually loads in our client's browser. Now inside index.html file, we have something known as decorator. It's a component decorator. So our app.component, it has a selector where we say that, okay, name this as app.root, and inside index.html, we say that go ahead and render app.root component. And if you go ahead and look in the browser, look into the HTML, you will see that app.root, this tag is being rendered in the DOM, and inside it, whatever our component HTML is there is getting rendered here. So here we have h1, hi, this works, and then we have the one-way binding interpolation, hi, this is one-way binding. So this is what is being displayed inside app.root tag. Make sense?
Right. So, Salim, there seemed to be some link between the file name and the component name. So when you said your component is app module, then the file name has to be app.module. If I typed in there apps module, then my file name has to be apps.module. Is that how it works, or you're fixed with just the same name? It has to be app module. Or yeah, bootstrap. Go back to the other file where you had mentioned the bootstrap call was being made, main.ts, right?
This one?
Yeah, so when you said app module, the file name has to be app.module. Is that correct?
No, this is basically the class name. The file name could be anything. Here I can say abc.module.ts or anything. But inside app.module, you will see the class name is app.module.
Okay, fine.
So this is what Angular looks for.
So there's no link between the file name and what's mentioned. All you have to make sure is the class is the same. Class name is the same.
Yeah, the class name is the same.
Sounds
And here, this double dot is just a standard which Angular and everyone practices. That is, okay, we have an app that is of type component, and lastly the extension. So here you see we have the same name app, then it's declared that it's a part of the component, and then HTML. So
I believe that the association was made in the import with the file name to that app.
this component.html?
No, it's in a different file. Try maybe the TS.
Yeah.
App component TS maybe. There you go, right there. Yes, in main. See how app.module is mapped to app module?
Yeah. So basically, what happens is, say I have app.module class here, and I've written the name here that I want to use app.module. So I'll need to import that class so that main.ts understand that what I'm declaring. It's something like the using statement, and
right, just like in Java, you have to include, if you use the class, you have to import it before you start to use it.
Yeah.
Right, but the question was about the relation between the name app module and the file name. And I was just trying to point out that you could call it morning coffee module as long as you defined it as such in the import associated with the file, correct?
Absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you.
Basically, we are saying like import app module from that specific location.
File,
so,
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, this is correct that I can change the name here, say like coffee module, and like I can synonym it as coffee module and use it here, if I'm not wrong.
But you need to have that in the
But we need to have
module.
that as an
app
export.
module.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Export as well. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds
so good. Hey Salim, the gist of a single application SPA, single page application is this. We have just one component which covers all my application. Is that true?
No, we have
No?
one index.html file which we deploy to our end user. In his
Okay.
browser, he always sees that single index.html file, but we have multiple components for us to show him different portion of our applications. We may have one component to display him the entire uh, what do we call, say, the grid, one component where we give him a form to register, one component where he edits the form. But you're essentially correct, but we don't give him only one component, we give him a one index.html file, because here I can have other components as well, and
Okay.
Angular will render that.
Got it. Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so I think then I lost the, okay. Yeah, so I have shown this one-way binding. So I'll move ahead with a one-way binding using a simple button click so that we get an understanding of how HTML events, how to work with HTML events. So in my app.component HTML file, what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and add a button. Here you can see that we have an we call it as Angular event attributes, which is not exactly same as HTML, because in HTML you would have written something as on click. In Angular, we have custom which correlate with HTML events. So whenever we want to use HTML event, we use this braces, brackets, and then we write the event name. So in future courses, I'll share with you more on this events, and I'll also share a link where we have the list of events with us. Now to handle this click event, I have a function that I am calling from my click event, that is on click me function. And now if I save, you will see that I'm getting an exception. And this is one of the great part of Angular, is that Angular, while compiling, it goes ahead and looks into our HTML, and if we have any errors in our HTML, it will throw us an exception. So here it says that it can't find the on click me function. So I'll go ahead in my app.component.cs and I'll add the function here. Okay, so this is the function name on click me, and here it's void, so it's not returning anything, it's just updating my display message property. And in TypeScript, whenever we access our properties and functions, we have to use the this keyword. And here I'm just saying that I am clicked, I'm essentially changing the data here. And if I go to my browser and if I click here, you see this is what the initial value of our variable is. And if I click it, so it says that I am click, and you can see the DOM was here updated. I'll just refresh it. You'll see that hi, this is one-way binding, and if I click here, the value, so there was no refresh, no nothing, just the value was updated. And this is how single page applications essentially work. Only the DOMs are updated. The elements in our DOM are updated.
Hey, Salim, quick question here.
Mhm.
On the debugger, right below there, it shows like which CLI version I'm using,
Mhm.
which Angular version I'm using. Is there any way to hide it? Or because from the hacker's point of view, hey, I see that you're using this one, so I know the vulnerabilities belongs to
Yeah,
this one and I can code.
Yes, there are ways where we can hide it. And remember one thing, because of this demo, I'm running this as a dev mode. So there are lots of things which you will see. I'll use
Okay.
the console application here. So when we deploy in production mode, we will Angular by itself, when we run here, you can see call enable prod mode to enable production mode. So it will stop displaying console.log. It will uglify the JavaScripts, and you will not see a lot of thing here.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So where I was. So yeah. So I'll now go ahead and show you a basic two-way binding here, no? In Angular, how to interact data from HTML to code behind, and then from code behind to HTML. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and
When you say code behind, what does it mean?
this our TypeScript. Our TypeScript
Okay.
class is what we traditionally we have been calling it code behind. So the terminology is stuck with me. So I'll try to call it TypeScript class. Okay.
Fine.
So what I'm doing basically is I'm taking a div and I'm just to show that Angular HTML pages also support like inline styles and all. I'm just put a margin top here, and then I have declared an input here, and here we have something which is known as attribute binding. So ng model attribute, what it does is it enables us to work with two-way binding. So if we have some data in our TypeScript class and we want to display in our input text box, ng model will look into this variable, and whenever we type something to our code, ng model will assign that value to the binding variable. And here using interpolation, I am displaying whatever data is being assigned into model's binding variable. So I'll declare this binding variable in our code behind. So I'll just declare it as an empty string, and in my okay, I have some exception here. Event is not assignable to. Okay, yeah. So this exception is not very helpful, but what's happening here is since we are using ng model, now ng model is part of another library. Now, since we are using ng model, which is part of another library, we have to go ahead and tell Angular that we want to use that library, and which is part of the forms module. So here you can see I have included forms module, and we just imported the forms module for angular.forms library. And now if I go ahead and save it, this should work. And if you see whatever I type here, the binding variable that we have defined here using interpolation is displaying that. Like, okay. Anybody have any questions so far, like using this binding method and ng model? Okay. So I believe I have covered that class. Yeah, classes have properties and method, which I have showed you. Like this is our Angular TypeScript class. We have properties here, and we have a method. We can declare methods. Here we are handling an event from our HTML, but we can have other methods, other private methods, which we want to define here. And then all Angular components have the component decorator. Now, this decorators is how Angular understand, because without this decorator, if I remove this decorator, this is essentially just a simple TypeScript class. Like export class, app component is a basic TypeScript class. Module is a basic TypeScript class. So when we go ahead and add this decorators, that's how that's how Angular frameworks understand that, okay, this should behave as a module, and here in this case, this class should behave as component. Now directives. Now directives are what we use to attach like behaviors to our DOM element. I have shown you one directive here, that is this ng model. Then I'll also show you another one next. Now when we write our custom directives, we have to use the directive decorator, and we can use, there are lots of built-in directives in Angular, which we'll come to learn about more. And essentially, if we divide our directives, we have three directives. Like essentially, we have structural, attributes, and component. I believe I've showed you two till now. That is this ng module, because it's used as an attribute here. We call it as attribute directive. Now, all components essentially are directives, because we can use them as a custom HTML tag here. So these are known as component attributes. And structural directives. So structural directives is how we work with our HTML. Like we want to hide some elements in our HTML, or we want to loop over. The two most important directives that we'll use every day, there is the ngIf and ngFor. Let me show you how ngIf works. So to define the ngIf directive, I'll just say ngIf here, and I'll say if, go ahead and look for the following variable. I'm calling it as this display, and in my app component, I'll say, okay, I have a variable is, if I could, I'll say that I have this variable is display, and I'll say it's of type Boolean, and I'll say false. So now if I go ahead and look at my HTML, you'll see that the text box is now hidden. The DOM is no longer rendering the text box section because my ngIf is false. And if I go ahead and set it to true, you can see the diff is now visible. So this is how structural directives help us to work with HTML in Angular. So by this way, you can imagine we have code that says that, okay, I don't want to display this specific set of DOM elements because one of my condition is false. And whenever it's true, go ahead and let the user have that UI displayed.
So, Salim, we have just time check. We have 10 more minutes. We leave last at least 3 to 5 minutes for any questions that participants may have. Please continue.
Okay, sure. Okay, so I'll just quickly tell you about services. And we have in detail session where we go in deep with services. Now, just like any other building blocks of Angular service is also a very simple TypeScript class, and we have the injectable decorator there. So what injectable decorator does is that it tells Angular that, okay, it's a service class. Now, services define set of operation for specific purposes. So you can imagine that you want to implement logging throughout your application. So we don't want to go ahead and write code that we like the same code over and over again in all of our components. and maybe our service talks with a cloud, say application inside, or some of our endpoint where we are going and storing our logs. So we use services so that we can call that piece of code from our components. Like it implements functionality independent of particular component. That's essentially the same thing. The piece of logic which we want to share with other components and essentially are not part of that component. Now, services is the basic way how we store state when we move from one component to other. We can share data using our services and logic across, because like services are essentially a simple class, so we can have methods and functions. Encapsulate external interaction. Again, we have, say for example, a product API which we want to call. So in order to interact with our product API's endpoints, we'll create a product service, and which will encapsulate the interaction with our endpoints, say the HTTP communication of post, put, delete from our components. And what our component will see, just the basic properties and methods which it needs to call to interact with our APIs. Okay, and then we have routing. Since Angular is a single page application, routing works a bit differently in Angular. So it doesn't mean that whenever a user clicks on a route, he is physically taken to a different page. The browser's URL will show that he is on a different page, but he will physically stay on the index.html page, and just the DOM element will change. So routing in Angular is quite interesting. There are many ways by which we can restrict our users from visiting certain pages. Now, Angular routing supports something known as lazy loading. So what lazy loading essentially means that we only get the data when we actually need it. So when we do lazy loading in routing, it's the last possible minute when we actually visit the page, we go ahead and update our DOM. Okay, so one part I just quickly want to, and I feel it's very important, is to explain you what package.json file is. Now, package.json is a configuration file in Angular, and package.json has essentially three parts. One is the scripts. Now, script is how the Angular CLI's command are synonym with the npm's command. So here you have seen me, I have been doing npm start. I'll just show you once again. So here I'll do npm start, which essentially will go ahead and call ng-serve. That is, it will npm start command is synonym with ng-serve. Like we are saying that whenever npm start command is typed, go ahead and execute the ng-serve command. Now these are Angular CLI commands and these are node commands. Now, say when we deploy and we have something like a pipeline created on all, our DevOps guys may want to have npm commands, and we want to do some synonyms, because let me just show you one example. You have noticed that when I do ng-serve, it goes ahead and run on port 4200. I want to change the port here. I want to say now go ahead and run on 4300. So the guy who is deploying or the pipeline, or say any scenarios which comes ahead where we have custom commands on, we can also go ahead and add other commands as well. Say go ahead and deploy this prod here. So this part act as synonyms here. So now if I go ahead and run npm run, npm start run, you will see that now ng-serve port 4300 is executed. Okay, so Same way we have the, and yes,
It says run is not.
yeah, that, and
A quick
I
question.
mistake it.
Where do we need to run these commands from? From command prompt, from the place where we
Yeah.
installed our npm, or
Just do
Yep.
that.
From our code, from where our source code is, if you
Show
see,
the directory.
yep. So you can see this is where my source code is. So wherever my package.json file is, I can go ahead and write. I can type the command there. I think my synonym has some issue. I think it should be double. Yep. So now my application will no longer execute in port 4200. It will start executing and so it's now started to execute in 4300. Okay, so coming back to the package.json file, we have something known as the dependencies. So dependencies are the Angular libraries and third-party packages which is needed by Angular to run on the client's machine. So this dependencies is what will essentially get packaged, built, uglified, minified, and then sent to the client's browser, and then the browser engine, say for example the V8 engine in Chrome, will look into these libraries and then work with displaying and all the functionalities that Angular or we have built. Now there is the thing which is the dev dependencies. Dev dependencies is something which we as a developer have added the dependencies and we are working with it. For example, we have installed Angular CLI, which we need to like create a startup project, which we need to scaffold our application. So this part is not packaged and deployed to the client browser. This is what we use. And so here you can see we have the Angular libraries, and we have three different things. We have zone.js, which is essentially how Angular knows when our DOMs are updated, the events, it keeps tracks of it. Then we have TS library. This is a runtime of TypeScript. And then we have something called RxJS. Now, RxJS is a JavaScript library, which helps us to work with observables and streams. And then we have the other dependencies and all. One thing I want to mention here is that Node package manager, it works with semantic versioning, SEMVer as we call. So what semantic versioning is, the first decimal represents the major version of a package or application, and the second digit, it defines the minor version, and lastly these are the patches. So say we are developing an application and we decided to go ahead with semantic versioning. So whenever we do a small bug fix and bug releases, we will update the last digit of our version. And then say we have made a changes to a feature, but that feature does not break the application as it is, so our client will not have crashes with our release. Then we update the minor patch, a minor digit. And whenever there is, like if I go ahead and upgrade from 12 to 13 year, then that means that there will be breaking changes and we should be careful. Now this tilde, what this tilde says is that internally, whenever Angular runs, Angular have dependencies, it can go ahead and update it up till 9. No more than that. It will not go ahead and install anything that is of version 3 in minor release. It will stop at 9. And what caret means, is that it will go ahead and release it up till 9 for the minor, but it will not go ahead and upgrade it to the major patch. So, and we need this to define here, to declare here, because there is something known as the package.log.json. Now, package.log.json is what Angular uses to build dependencies of dependencies. So say when I go ahead and use something as Bootstrap, so Bootstrap will have further dependencies. So we are saying Angular said, don't go ahead and update it further than the minor release. Don't go ahead and do major upgrade. Does this make sense, guys? Or you have any question with package.json?
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So go ahead, Salim.
Yeah. So that's it, Samir, for
All
the
right.
first session. Yeah.
So I'll quickly summarize what we did today. We understood what what is Angular, what are the moving parts in Angular. Yeah. We looked at some code examples so that we understand the implementation of modules, components, and directives. We built a very simple application. We compiled it. We saw how we change code, and then in a hot deploy type of way, the page also gets updated on its own. Yeah. Now, for tomorrow, can we, in a minute, just quickly go over the topics that we will be covering?
Yes, Samir. Just give me one moment. I haven't.
Sure.
Just give me one. Okay.
Okay.
I'll need to share my screen. I'm just sharing my screen.
Okay.
Okay. Yep.
Just at a high level, what are the topics we will be covering tomorrow?
Yeah. So tomorrow, you're able to see my screen, right? Again.
I'm able to see. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. So tomorrow, what we'll do is we'll look into TypeScript a bit in more detail, how to declare TypeScript properties, methods, and we'll look into TypeScript interfaces. And then what we'll do is we'll change the TypeScript to an Angular component, and then we'll go ahead and work with that Angular component. We'll bootstrap or the component that we created so that Angular application loads that, and then we'll further go ahead and customize our Angular template. We'll further look into how we can work with the styles in more. We'll look more into the data bindings, and then we'll start working with Angular CLI. We'll both create manually components, and then we use Angular CLI to scaffold Angular components further.
Okay, so it looks like tomorrow we'll be spending time with learning TypeScript and also a deep dive on the Angular components, right? Okay, so for today's session, we would like to conclude. We are already sort of 5 minutes overshot the scheduled end time. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put it on the chat. I will have Salim respond to you by email. We'll send you the information that you're seeking or try to answer tomorrow.